Welcome to our special investigation. Today, we are not merely remembering 5 extraordinary individuals. We are attempting to understand why their simultaneous departure triggered such a wave of emotions across the globe. This is a story about how technology, science, law, and art become weapons in the fight for truth. It is a story about why some are called heroes while others are labeled criminals. And it is a story about how society reacts when those who change the world suddenly vanish. Joshua Allen, The Final Dance. He left at the very moment when the curtain should have touched the floor. October 1st, 2025 became not just a date on the calendar. It was a pause in the great symphony of movement, a final chord that would never fade away. Joshua was born in 1995 into a family where rhythm was the only language that needed no translation. His father, a jazz saxophonist, his mother a poet. Their small apartment in Detroit was filled with music that lived in the creaking floorboards, in the raindrops on the roof, in the beating of hearts. At 5 years old, he danced for the first time, not on stage, but on a dirty sidewalk, accompanied by the distant sound of sirens and the whisper of the wind. Passers-by mistook him for a madman, but in his movements was the mathematical precision of a falling star. His mother died of an overdose when he was 7. His father drowned his sorrow in drink, and the boy was left alone with the streets. Dance became his refuge. He transformed pain into fluidity, loneliness into a duet with an invisible partner, fear into the furious rhythm of tap. At 14, he was noticed by choreographer Anthony Gold. The old master said, watching him dance under a bridge, "This isn't dance. This is a prayer addressed to movement itself." His professional debut took place in 2015 in a half-ruined Broadway theater. He performed Requiem for the Unfulfilled, a piece that critics called a punch to the gut of modern choreography. Over 10 years, he revolutionized the concept of dance. His style was compared to the fall of Icarus, equally beautiful and doomed. He didn't dance, he lived entire lives on stage, turning his body into a story about all lost and found souls. In 2022, he created Silent Symphony, a performance where movement was born from silence, and the only sounds were the beating of hearts and the rustle of skin against air. Audience members cried without understanding why. His dance spoke a language that only their bodies knew. But behind the external success hid a man who every evening would draw the curtains of his dressing room and sit for hours in darkness, as if afraid that movement would consume him completely. He was found in the dressing room of the Apollo Theater on October 1st, 2025. He sat before the mirror in full stage makeup, as if frozen in the pause between reality and reflection. On the table lay the unfinished score of a new ballet, Dance of Lonely Shadows. Doctors confirmed cardiac arrest. The organ that had given rhythm for 25 years had suddenly fallen silent forever. The pathologist would later say that the dancer's heart resembled a worn-out spring. It had simply exhausted its reserve of motion. On the mirror, he had written in lipstick, "Please dance The Swan by St. Saëns as a farewell. It was the first dance I ever loved." News of his death spread around the world in minutes. That night in New York, Paris, Tokyo, and Moscow, dancers took to the streets and squares to perform his Silent Symphony. The movements repeated like an echo, passing from one city to another. The New York Times wrote, "It wasn't a dancer who died, it was the language through which the body spoke to the soul." Theaters worldwide left their stages empty on the day of his funeral. The finest tribute to a choreographer for whom space was sacred. But the most poignant response came from Detroit. On the very sidewalk where he danced as a child, street dancers gathered. They performed a 12-hour improvisation, 1 hour for each year of his career. A week later, his will was discovered. He had left his entire fortune to a foundation helping children from slums. In his diary, he had written, "May at least one child be able to dance from joy, not from pain." They say that sometimes, in the silence of the Apollo Theater, footsteps can still be heard. That the mirrors in dressing rooms show not reflections, but the dance that might have been. Perhaps true dancers never die, they simply become part of the rhythm of the universe. Joshua Allen proved that dance is not merely movement. It is the breath of the soul, frozen in space. And as long as somewhere a body responds to music, as long as someone transforms pain into fluidity and joy into flight, he continues to live, in every sweep of an arm, in every leap, in every moment of weightlessness between the beats. Her childhood in England's Bournemouth was filled with quiet wonders. While other girls played with dolls, young Jane spent hours in the garden, observing ants carrying pine needles or spiders weaving their webs. Her first research was 5 hours spent in a henhouse to learn how chickens lay eggs, the patience that would later become her trademark. Her parents read her not fairy tales, but books about animals. Kipling's The Jungle Book became her Bible, and Tarzan, her first childhood love. She dreamed not of balls and dresses, but of African savannas where animals lived free, without cages or chains. At school, she was laughed at, just some quiet girl with thoughts always scattering in different directions. But she already knew then. Her real teachers awaited her not in classrooms, but deep within the tropical forest. Jane Goodall began her journey in 1960 when, at 26 years old, she traveled to Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania. Without a university education, but with boundless patience and love for animals, she revolutionized primatology. Her early discoveries, chimpanzees using tools, their complex social structure, individual personality traits, forced the scientific community to reconsider the boundaries between humans and animals. But the real battle began later when she realized that research alone wasn't enough. In 1977, she founded the Jane Goodall Institute, which over time grew into a global organization with branches in 35 countries. Her Roots and Shoots program united millions of young people worldwide in the fight to preserve nature. Over 65 years of work, she evolved from a lone researcher in the jungles to a UN advisor on environmental issues. Her 85 books and 47 documentaries changed humanity's relationship with nature, and her research methods became the gold standard in ethology. She passed away quietly like a forest falling asleep, without fuss, accepting the morning as a gift. The sun ignited the treetops of Gombe at the very moment her heart beat its final rhythm. On her knees lay a diary with an unfinished phrase, an ellipsis stretching into eternity. She was found in a posture as if listening to something important, perhaps to the whisper of chimpanzees in the canopy, or to the voices of ancestors. A cup of herbal tea preserved the imprint of her lips. Her glasses lay nearby, as if she had simply set them aside to see her dreams more clearly. Old Flora came to the house at dawn, as if sensing that the world had lost the one who understood the language of her heart. She was buried in the embrace of the earth she protected, in a simple bamboo ark, the final resting place for the woman who taught humanity to converse with nature. Jane Goodall's death triggered an unprecedented global response. UNESCO declared a week of mourning, and flags were flown at half-mast in 89 countries, a case unparalleled for a private individual. But the true grief unfolded at the grassroots level. On the day of her death, thousands of volunteers worldwide planted trees, living monuments to Jane, as they called them. The social media flash mob #ThankYouJane gathered over 50 million posts within a day. The scientific community reacted no less emotionally. 14 Nobel laureates signed an open letter calling for the creation of a Jane Goodall Fund to protect endangered species. Meanwhile, conservative politicians in several countries attempted to block state funding for programs in her name, labeling her legacy anti-progressive. The most touching responses came from Africa. In Tanzania, where she spent most of her life, a 30-day mourning period was declared. Local residents who had once assisted her research told CNN, "She was our mother. She taught us that animals are our brothers, not a resource." Kash Patel, sudden silence. Kash Patel was born in 1978 to a family of Indian immigrants who arrived in the U.S. with $50 in their pocket. His childhood was spent in a poor Chicago neighborhood where street laws were harsher than any textbook. The son of a taxi driver and a nurse, Kash learned early that the world is divided between those protected by the law and those it ignores. At 8, he saw police search their apartment without a warrant, on suspicion. At 10, he watched his father weep helplessly after losing his business to an official's bribe. School became his battlefield. His accent and skin color made him a target for ridicule, but every blow only tempered the steel in his eyes. He fought not for himself, but to protect other immigrant children like him. A law teacher, noticing his sharp mind, gifted him a copy of the U.S. Constitution. He would keep that book his entire life as a talisman, a reminder that the law could be a weapon for the weak against the strong. This defined his life's path, graduating with honors from Harvard Law School, becoming the youngest federal prosecutor in U.S. history at 25. His career is a chronicle of fighting the system from within. First, victory over mafia clans, then exposure of police corruption, finally, war against white-collar crime in the highest echelons of power. His book, Ruthless Justice, became a Bible for a new generation of lawyers. But the true cost of this fight became clear when his own family came under attack. Threats, bribery attempts, his brother's death under mysterious circumstances. Nothing could make him abandon his principles. Death found him amidst papers and laws, on the battlefield he himself had chosen. His head rested on the keyboard, as if in a final bow to Themis, whose knight he had been. On the monitor hung the prophetic words, "Why they will die tomorrow," a phrase that became his epitaph. An unfinished cup of coffee retained the warmth of his hands, the adrenaline in his blood, echoes of his last battle. The bodyguard who took sudden leave, the phone call with a ghostly interlocutor, the vanished files, all formed a riddle without an answer. He departed at the moment of highest tension, like a sword breaking in a decisive clash. The law he served proved powerless before simple human frailty, or before someone's relentless will. The reaction to Kash Patel's death split American society with a force comparable to presidential elections. Conservative media immediately declared him a victim of the deep state. A former U.S. president released a statement calling Patel a great patriot murdered for the truth. Left-wing activists conversely celebrated. A prominent progressive blogger wrote on Twitter, "Finally, this fascist lawyer got what he deserved." The hashtag good riddance trended in liberal circles. But the most interesting reaction occurred within the legal community. The American Bar Association split. 300 prominent lawyers signed a petition demanding Patel be posthumously awarded for serving the truth, while another group called him a disgrace to the profession. The situation on the streets reached a boiling point. Outside the Department of Justice, Patel's supporters set up a permanent vigil demanding the truth about the murder. Their opponents held counter-protests with signs reading, "Justice has prevailed." Police had to install barriers between the two groups. Judit Elek, the final song. Judit Elek grew up in a family where art was a form of resistance. Her childhood in Budapest was like living in an aquarium. Someone was always watching from behind the glass. The daughter of dissidents, she learned from infancy that some words are better whispered, and true thoughts should be hidden behind a mask of innocence. Her lullabies weren't folk songs, but verses by banned poets that her parents read behind closed doors at night. At 6, she sang her first self-composed song in the kitchen, about a caged bird dreaming of the sky. Her mother, frightened, forbade her from singing such things in front of others. By 10, she already understood that every melody was a cipher, every line, a message. Her first guitar, gifted by a musician neighbor, became not just an instrument, but a weapon, as dangerous as her father's pen writing political pamphlets. Her parents, prominent Hungarian dissidents, taught her that every song could be a weapon in the fight for truth. Her musical journey began at 15 with performances in the Budapest metro. Even then, her lyrics, full of hidden meanings and allegories, attracted attention from both admirers and security services. Her first album, Quiet Protest, 2008, went largely unnoticed, but the second, Voice of the Streets, 2012, made her the voice of a generation. When authorities banned her songs, she found a brilliant solution. She began distributing them through underground radio stations and cassettes, like in Soviet times. Over her 20-year career, she conducted 17 secret tours across Eastern Europe. Her songs were translated into 23 languages. Even under constant government pressure, threats, and censorship, she continued writing music that became the soundtrack to the struggle for democracy across the region. Her life ended on a high note, in a whirlwind of speed and fire. The car that plunged into the abyss became her final stage, and the tongues of flame, her last applause. The 45-meter skid mark stretched like a pause before the climax of an unfinished symphony. The phantom black SUV, anonymous threats, traces of brake tampering, all sounded like dissonance in her melody of freedom. Her final social media post proved prophetic. Sometimes one day changes everything. An epitaph written in her own hand. She sang until the very end, even in the fall, even in the fire. Her voice didn't fall silent, but dissolved in the wind over the Hungarian mountains, becoming part of the song that eternity sings. The death of Judit Elek became the spark that ignited Eastern Europe. The day after her death, the largest protest in 10 years gathered in Budapest. Over 100,000 people with signs reading, "Her songs will live on," and "Murdered for the truth." But the real phenomenon occurred in the music industry. Her band songs topped the charts in 17 countries within 24 hours. Young musicians across Eastern Europe began recording covers of her compositions, and memorial concerts were held from Prague to Tbilisi. The Hungarian government initially tried to ignore the wave of outrage, but when students began daily demonstrations outside Parliament, a ban on public glorification of extremist music was introduced. This backfired. Now her songs were heard even at opposition events. The international reaction was equally sharp. The European Parliament passed a resolution condemning the possible political assassination, and the U.S. Secretary of State called Elek a voice of freedom. In response, the Hungarian government accused the West of interference in internal affairs. Rima Belyakova, the final monologue. She left when the autumn wind tore the last leaf from the maple tree beneath her window. Without fanfare, without farewell speeches, just as she had lived. Rima Belyakova, a woman whose name became a symbol of an entire era in Russian theater. Rima was born in 1947 in Leningrad, into a family where theater was not just an art form, it was a religion. Her mother was an usher at the Alexandrinsky Theater, her father, a lighting technician. The girl grew up in theater wings, falling asleep to the whisper of actors' lines and the smell of grease paint. By 6, she knew all of Hamlet by heart. By 12, she would sneak into the gallery and watch performances 7 times in a row. Her first role, a silent extra, happened at 14 when an actress fell ill. The director said, "You stand as if rooted to the spot, but your eyes are alive." Her father passed away in 1963. Rima remained with her mother in a communal apartment on Fontanka, where theater posters served as wallpaper, and dinner often consisted only of tea with bread. But she already knew, her life belonged to the stage. Her professional debut took place in 1968 at the legendary BDT, Bolshoi Drama Theater. The role of Emilia in Othello, tiny but performed in such a way that critics wrote, "It seems Shakespeare imagined her exactly in this role." Over 57 years on stage, she created more than 100 characters. Her Ranovskaya was compared to a birch tree, equally fragile and unbending. Her Maria Tudor was called a storm in velvet gloves. But real fame came from her role as Masha in Three Sisters. The one who remained silent for entire acts, yet her silence was more eloquent than any monologue. She rarely acted in films, saying that the movie camera devours the soul. But each of her works became an event. The Long Farewell, with her Anna, became a classic of Soviet cinema. During the 1990s, when theaters were emptying, she remained faithful to the stage. She performed to half-empty halls, but with the same dedication as to full houses. "Theater isn't about audiences," she would say. "Theater is about truth." She was found on November 7, 2024, in her dressing room at the Alexandrinsky Theater. She sat before the mirror in her Nina Zarechnia costume, preparing for the evening performance. In her hand, she clutched a note. "Please forgive me, I cannot go on stage today." Doctors confirmed a massive stroke. The heart that had given 76 years to the theater could not endure. The pathologist would later say that her lungs resembled an old theater curtain, full of holes from time and inspiration. On the table lay an unfinished diary. The last entry: "Today I saw my father in a dream. He says, 'Daughter, your entrance is soon.'" News of her death spread across the country within hours. That evening, performances in all Russian theaters began with a minute of silence. At the Alexandrinsky, her portrait was brought onto the stage and placed on a stool, as was done in the old days when a great actor passed away. Kommersant wrote, "It wasn't an actress who died, it was the conscience of Russian theater." Colleagues from different countries sent telegrams. Oleg Tabakov once said of her, "Rima is that rare case when a person is born already a finished artist." But the most poignant words came from the audience. A line formed at the theater box office of people wanting to buy tickets to the already canceled performance. "We just want to sit in the auditorium where she performed," they said. A month later, her will was discovered. She bequeathed all her estate, a modest apartment on Petrogradskaya and a collection of theater relics, to the children's studio at the BDT. In a note, "Let at least one child experience the happiness of standing on a real stage." They say that whispers can still be heard backstage at the Alexandrinsky, that the light sometimes turns on in her dressing room, and the mirror reflects not a face, but the shadow of Nina Zarechnia. Perhaps true artists never die, they simply exit to the wings of eternity. Rima Belyakova proved that theater is not merely an art form. It is the breath of time frozen between lines. And as long as somewhere a curtain rises, as long as an actor takes a bow, and an audience holds its breath, she continues to live. In every rustle of the curtain, in every spotlight beam, in every pause between words. 5 lives, 5 destinies so different and yet so similar in what matters most. They all walked different paths but served one purpose. They made our world more honest, harmonious, and beautiful. Rima Belyakova taught us to hear the music of silence on theater stages. Jane Goodall showed us how to understand the language of nature. Joshua Allen proved that truth is stronger than any system. Kash Patel fought for justice until his last breath. And Judit Elek turned art into a weapon of freedom. They are no longer with us, but their deeds remain, their discoveries, their legacy. As Rima Belyakova said, "A true artist dies only when the final applause fades." Dear viewers, if the stories of these remarkable people have touched your hearts, please subscribe to our channel. We will continue to share stories of those who have changed and are changing this world. Click the bell icon so you don't miss new investigations and biographies. Thank you for being with us. Remember, as long as we preserve the memory of great souls, they continue to live. In our hearts, in our thoughts, in our actions, until we meet again in the world of extraordinary destinies.